Why, Curt?
Good morning, Dr. Brad. I'm
Good
sorry I'm
morning.
beardless.
I
Uh,
don't. I think you
uh,
did it on purpose.
what?
I think you did it on
Well,
purpose.
I did it because I don't know. Sometimes there's like too much shampoo in there, and it makes the whole grooming thing nightmare. So I had to start over. Basically, I let it get too long. Right? I let it get too long. I like it to be short. Anyway, so the problem is that now that people can see that my resting serious face is actually a resting bitch face, and so I'm a little disappointed in how I might come across. Um, but anyway, uh, I'm sorry about the beardless. It'll grow back.
It's growing right now. I can hear it.
Yeah, I love you.
Oh, very good, brother.
So
He asked me that. So people, so I grow the beard and all the hair and stuff. Then I got cut it all off. They go, "What? Why'd you stop growing your beard?" I said, "I didn't. It's still growing. I just cut it all off. It's okay."
I remember when you cut yours off, I was pretty shocked. Um, or pretty shocked. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's normal for us to find that. I just shave mine. I do this all the time, right? About once or twice a year, I shave it all off and I just start it all over because I'm usually for the same reason. I didn't keep up trimming it, and so it's fucking impossible.
Right. That's right.
So anyway, we've got some good things to do. Other than I learned the lesson that you don't when you convert to using a coffee pot.
Oh,
That I've got a very fancy coffee pot, So get a very fancy coffee pot that you have to put the right amount of coffee, because if it's weak, then it's no good. And then if you're a proper conservative, you have a problem wasting that coffee, and so you drink
it is. You
very
got to
bad
toss it.
experience.
You got to toss it, but you can't.
But you can't, because it's just wrong somehow. So you have to drink that weak coffee, or the 2 cups of weak coffee. So, but then you forget that if you've made the weak coffee, you really don't want to drink it. You might leave some in the bottom. And
Oh
then when you
no.
forget to unplug the pot, it turns into this concrete sludge at the bottom. And I'm like, I need a wife. I'm just not prepared for self-care. This is just not a thing.
I'm not qualified. I understand. That was a
Anyway,
sad story. That was a sad, needy story.
what?
It's okay. It still made me laugh.
Oh, shit.
Well, quite a week, huh?
Well, there's a lot going on right now. And I'm just sort of like, my head's spinning because I'm kind of confused. But there's a lot going on out there right now.
It seems like it's accelerating.
Oh, yeah. What's our first topic? It's along these lines.
First, first topic is about Scott Adams.
Okay, so yeah, it's accelerating. I feel bad for the guy because he uses a very similar method of breaking a problem down, discovering its limits, and then working back from it. I mean, his method is consistent. I mean, he does the same thing. As he says, well, is that believable? He says, okay, here's a premise, or the first premise.
Right,
Is that believable, or is that not?
right.
Right, and he just breaks things down into that. And he says, well, is that believable? But what if? And then he explores the limits, right? So he's basically he works through ideas by testing reasonable limits of reasonableness, right? Yeah. And
Which
so,
is a liberal methodology.
correct, it is a liberal methodology, right? Is testing reasonableness, and but the fact is that his problem is against the lying on both sides,
Yeah,
which is a classical liberal position.
right.
So, I put him in that. Well, I mean, he's obviously got some democratic, or at least traditional classical liberal utopian beliefs about man, right? And so he does that. But his dislike is judicial, his conservative dislike of falsehood, or his Jeffersonian dislike of falsehood, which is probably the middle point, is pretty legit. So, conservatives follow him simply because he does that now. And one of the reasons that conservatives like this is because we don't really mind being told we're wrong. But we're happier to be told how the left is wrong. So we're okay being both wrong. The liberals aren't, though. They can't handle being told that they've been wrong, or because they need to be able to trust in feels and social networks and social constructions. They need to be able to feel that they can trust the pack. Their fear of not trusting the pack is higher than their fear of
being misled by the pack,
right? And so
or the herd,
right? The herd is correct. So the problem for the right is we're masculine trait of disagreeableness manifests as politeness and truth telling, right? So we get this conservative view of, well, we just want to have truth be told, and we'll accommodate it, even if it makes us feel like we were stupid at one point or another. And then some point, then of course we have the spectrum like everybody else does, right? Which is you have the crazies, right? And there's a difference between chemtrails and as that's my sort of, okay, that's pretty out there. And then all the ones that are turned out to be right.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
So we have our people, right, that are across the spectrum, and they double down on that, which is normal, right? Because the left doubles down on oppression narratives, and the right doubles down on conspiracy novels. That's okay. I'm all pretty close to Scott, really. I mean, I'm in the same age group. I have the similar background, right? And I have similar sentiments, except I have I've had greater responsibility, so I have greater skepticism over the opposition, right? I mean, obviously I'm more puritanical, but I mean, anyway, so I understand where he comes from pretty easily. And I understand how people react to him. I understand why he's got a conservative audience, is because the truth thing matters more to conservatives, and it matters less or almost zero to the left, right? So that's why he's got a conservative audience, despite that he's actually center left, right? I mean, in his policies, he's not necessarily center left in his cognition, which is the old way we used to describe it as, I'm socially liberal and and economically conservative, right? We used to be the way it was stated. But no, the problem is that when you say you're socially liberal now, this has become an extreme. So it used to be when you said I was socially liberal, it was like, I'm willing to tolerate some redistribution and government programs that care for people, and I'm willing to tolerate differences in behavior. Right? But now that they've broken that and gone all, socially liberal means, vagina hats and teaching your kids sexuality in school.
Making other people's kids suffer through it.
Yes, you're kind of in the position of, well, I mean, I can't be socially liberal anymore. And so what do you do when you can't be socially liberal? You have to go back being socially secure, socially conservative. It's like, it's a subconscious female where the men will take care of it, as just isn't conscious. It's an intuitionistic reaction. We tend to think that I don't need to worry about that. I need to worry about this, is ignoring the externalities, where the males work the opposite way, is that we see all these externalities and we're like, well, I'm sorry, it's difficult for your offspring or your group of numbskulls or whatever. We have to govern your numbskulls, but governing the numbskulls is available to the masculine. It's not available to the feminine, right? I mean, they have no way doing that other than seduction, right? And in groupness and belonging and the fear of being outcast. Well, that works for them, but it only works for them at that scale when it's personal. Or our work, which is the male work, is political. It works at political scale, which is, well, you could have your little whatever you want, but at some point we got to say no. So you have to have these things because cognitively, it turns out it's not reason or education, it's all fucking instinct. All right. And to some degree, it's also ability. In other words, you can't ask a person of 95 IQ with high empathy and, female empathizing or sympathizing and female instincts, which are the prey, they have a prey instinct. And they especially add on top of that neuroticism, and all of a sudden you've got is they're not capable of managing those limits like we are. Likewise, we're not capable. I'm certainly not capable of managing my own emotions. I don't know. So certainly not those of others. I can't even comprehend. What you're afraid of? What? I can't even comprehend the fears and the anxieties. So, you get in the position where, of course, we have this division of labor. So it has to be this way, and we have to govern and set limits. Anyway, I took that a little farther than I wanted to, but the idea is that what he does is really obvious, and why it appeals to conservatives is really obvious, and asking what his basic political leanings are is pretty obvious. He's demonstrated that he's basically a Democrat, a mainline Democrat, which is from our generation,
increasingly alienated group.
Right. And increasingly, he's basically a mainline Democrat that wants, do what we can that's good for people. It's pretty Christian. It's fundamentally the Christian ethic, right? It's do what's right.
What's interesting about him is it's like that when the liberals break from their herd, they break funny. They break hard. Yes. Because it's like it's hard for them to break from the herd, and the herd is so nuts that they're like they break hard and sharp.
Yes.
And so his was quite an interesting reaction to what he says was this poll that was taken. And he's like, what's interesting is liberals all have a problem with what he said, and conservatives don't, and in particular conservative blacks.
Yes.
And that was quite an interesting exposition that he gave on that.
Well, you can ask most white people, is it the problem when they say, I don't care about color? What they mean is, I don't care about conservative blacks, because you don't. They're fine. Go down south and find conservative black. They're fine, right? The problem we have is the victimhood complex of the blacks and the ghetto behavior of broken families. So, I keep saying this, Americans really don't demonstrate much racism. We demonstrate classism. And we have a problem with the black lower classes, and there are a large number of them, and they're a real fucking problem. But you look to black conservatives and yeah, they're a real fucking problem. I know. What are we going to do about it? They say the same thing, which is you break the family, this is what you get, and we broke the family. How do we get it back? So I don't know. I still find that the black in Gen Z. Maybe even some of the millennials, they have got to the point where you listen to the black men in that sphere, and they've overtaken the white working class as the voice of realism. And I think that's really a fascinating position they've taken. And of course, the white working class has gone over to radicalism because they're so upset. That's okay. That makes sense. But you start seeing this voice of reason. I follow a lot of young black guys, because their take is, it's like, give a black guy Thomas Sowell, and all of a sudden you've got an intellectual. You've got a conservative black, right? They're like, okay. So you see all these guys, and they've got, some of them got education, some of them don't. And then you got into the dating relationships thing, and the black guys are perfectly, painfully accurate about the relationship model. It's fucking.
I studied this. I was familiarized with the rap music back in the 90s, I guess. And it was like this. I thought that and I don't think the realism of the black artists who were making the rap at that time was much different than the consciousness that you're projecting today. But it was like I regarded it as anti-female sentimentality. And it's just like, no, I think it was just realism at their in their social realm. And now it's crept into almost all social realms, right?
Yes, exactly.
Which is kind of like, that surprised me. You said something about both sides giving up. I didn't understand that.
Well, so this is, can we finish on
Oh, yes.
Scott a little bit longer? Because I want to continue to play this a bit. So he's come out and he's like trying to explain it. And it turns out that a lot of people basically understand, but he's been canceled anyway. You know, because what he was doing was just doing what's obvious, is using a hyperbola, right, to create a frame through which you'd say, look what will happen if this continues. And that's what conservatives do, right? That's why conservatives always use hyperbola, because it's part of the general conservative intuition, which is, what if everybody did this? Which is the Kantian categorical imperative, which is the golden rule, basically. It's the same thing. It's the conservatives always ask the question, what if everybody did this? Or what would happen over time? Because conservatism, like the masculinity, is over time, while the empathy is in time. And that's the difference, right? It's a time horizon. So it was, you know, I'm just interested in how this is going from that point. On the other hand, he said, but now that I'm canceled, I feel, and I have this same feeling, now that I'm canceled, I feel I'm where I should be, which I thought you would find really interesting, because that's, you know,
It is.
Which is just as I don't have anything causing me to be biased, and I feel I'm at the, he said, he's basically saying he was at the point where he could do public good now, right, and without any external interference. And
right, because he felt like he was being blackmailed, I guess.
So you know, it's like I've maybe this is my destiny, kind of. He didn't say that, but that's what he was trying to get at.
It's kind of interesting because I gotta believe he's a very sharp fellow, and I can't imagine that he didn't think this was going to happen when he said what he said.
He didn't think it was going to happen. Absolutely didn't.
Really?
Yeah. And so one of the things to him, I have the same fucking problem. Like, you can't believe people are that stupid. Right? I mean, you just can't believe. I mean, I'm sure he thought it was obvious what he was doing. I mean, it was obvious to me when I was listening to him. All right, well, I mean, right. So, because you know, I don't listen to all this stuff. You know, I listen to something like one a week or something like that, maybe. Right? You know, whenever he says something that's on a topic I'm interested in, right, I'll listen to it. And he used the same freaking process on everything he does, and it's because he studied hypnotism, so he studied suggestion, so he understands suggestion. So it bothers him when people use suggestion via deception to create social construction. So I mean, I just, since I understand what he's trying to get at and what he's doing it, maybe I'm just a little numb to. And when he said this stuff, I just thought it was out. So he's come out and said it almost every day. He's an honest guy. He's like, he just didn't understand. Right. But he didn't, because he wouldn't have said it. I mean, he's the kind of guy. I mean, precisely because he's really a Democrat, right? I mean, a mainline Democrat, right? He wouldn't have said something that was going to offend people, right? If he that much, if he knew it. And I completely understand he wouldn't have. I do that all the time. I say stuff and I'm like, how did you possibly get there from what I said? You know, I can't believe it. But you know, it's like I make the same argument. My one failing, which is similar to his, is that, you know, smart people can't think of, you can't actually imagine how not smart people or even are going to process that information. and we consider smart also correspondent, where the left doesn't. The left's view of smart is closer to cunning, and our view of smart is closer to wise. And so you would, he's out there saying what he's saying, which is pretty obvious, and he didn't think of it. No, I do the same thing. I can't imagine anybody would object to me describing why this is the problem we're facing is an escalation of. We first faced the problem of escalating the working classes, males, and then we involve the females, and we're having the same fucking problem that we had by enfranchising the working class, that we're having with the enfranchising the females. And whenever you do that, you get a thought leadership group that comes out to take advantage of the new position. And I'm like, well, that's all that's happening, and our law has to suppress these incremental abuses of our means of cooperation between the sexes, classes, races, etc. Right? I mean, I don't know why that's the fact that it's the females are here and this is all feminine cognition we're dealing with. Why the fuck is that offensive to people? It should be just obvious, right? But it is offensive.
Oh, it's like it's an interesting. Are you calling me a criminal? I don't think that qualifies. That's how I regard it. How dare you? Wait, this is the appropriate response in the crowd is this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's just like, well, the problem is, I look at it and I'm like, wow, that's really explains things. Okay, and that, if that's what my followers tend to be, is like, oh shit, that explains things. It's whether it explains things or not whether you like it or not. I don't like fucking gravity. I mean, I'd like to be able to flap my arms and fly, right? I mean,
they would be wings. They could be wings.
Well, I mean, depending on how much lift you need,
right?
I mean, I'd like that, but I mean, I'd like the class problem not to exist, because everybody who had an IQ over 125. I'd really like that world, we don't have that world. I don't get, but I get to accept the world. I just want to know why and what to do about it, right? I mean,
right, it has more utility.
Right. So, but that's not true, because especially for the herd, right, the left, that's just horrific, because that means there's differences between people that have to be considered and weighted, and we can't just purely empathize within the moment feelings instead of overtime consequences. And so the left leaves consequences for the right. That's what they do, just like women leave consequences for men. It's just, so that's the way it is. I mean, why is that fucking horrible? Well, it's not horrible if you just want to know what's true so we can all get along. But getting along, knowing what's true, requires employment of reason. We're all getting along regardless of what's true does not require truth. It just requires conformity or tolerance or conformity. Anyway, so that's my point, is that I think he's been pretty cool
unanticipated.
I didn't anticipate it until he got going with it. Because, and it's possibly because he wasn't clear enough, right? I mean, I knew what he was doing, but he didn't interject. Like, I tend to talk too much because I'm always interjecting to defend against misinterpretation, right? So a lot of what I do is defense, is I'm predicting what's going to be somebody's going to run to, and so I'm offloading it, or I'm defending against it as I'm going through. Otherwise, I would say it's just a woman problem, right? I mean, that's antagonistic, right? I mean, but it's not just a woman problem; it's a cognitively female problem. Okay, now I've told a bunch of men that are liberals that they're manginas. It's true. Well, they don't want to hear that. All right, so what do I have to do? I have to show the pattern of history, and I have to show the pattern of psychology. So I'm doing a lot of exposition, as a matter of defense so that I can state the truth without being called, a simpleton or a caveman or something, right? I mean, it's just, this is the way it is. I don't get to choose it, right? And humans appear to be immodifiable out there because we don't seem to change our moral biases. So humans seem to be immodifiable. So we're sort of stuck with, how do we make this work? Well, he wasn't doing that when he was making that argument. And he's actually pretty good usually about making like, well, but if I'm not saying that this is the case because obviously that would, but he didn't prevaricate enough, he didn't defend himself enough. And so I think that's what maybe why it went there. But I just thought what he was saying was obvious, right? That we should, if people don't like you, you have to move away from them. Because if they hate you, then you just have to avoid them. And if they hate you, why should you? I thought, well, I mean, I don't know why that isn't fucking an obvious statement. And that's what people do.
No, it seemed like fairly self-evident to me when he said it.
So, but that's okay because that doesn't require you to self-modify. But if you're on the other side and you're being called a criminal, basically, then you see it as you're an awful.
It's an existential threat.
Yeah,
which is interesting because it's like so Scott Adams was and for the audience so that we're all on the same page, that he said this is the first survey that ever changes behavior, and it had to do with the question was posed to African Americans, I suppose. Is it okay to be white? And 53% said it's okay to be white. And he was okay with that answer. But approximately equal split, a little bit unequal split between the remainder, which is approximately a quarter believe that it's not okay to be white, and a quarter says they're not sure. And so Scott Adams was reasonable. He's like, I've been trying to help the African American community my whole life. And why would I help people that hate me? And it's like, it's an existential threat to him because if you say it's not okay to be white, well, he's white no matter what he does. And so it's like, it's an existential threat. 25% of that population is harbored, I should say, among that population, 25% are harbored haters. And half of them together aren't sure that that's a problem. And it's like just to be around the other half and to help the other half that you think are reasonable is kind of dangerous sounding, right? And that was the argument he made. And it's like, it was very reasonable.
Right. So let's look at the survey a bit, right? So when he was given it, I had trouble actually finding it.
Okay. I didn't look it up.
No, it's just two fucking questions. And it's just a question of, it's a test of reciprocity.
Oh.
Is it okay to be, it's okay to be black, right? Is it okay to be white? I mean, it's two questions. I can't remember the exact wording of it, but it's basically a test of reciprocity. I now I didn't pull down this spreadsheet. I tried, but it was so overloaded at the time. So, but my understanding is the spreadsheet, the end factor is 1,000 people. Right?
No.
When you ask a question, a general question of 1,000 people, you're actually getting into very high probability. It's over 97% generally.
How real this is.
Right. And so a random selection of 1,000 people tends to be a pretty accurate predictor. So this is a random selection of 1,000 people, but blacks are only 14% of the population. And so in this case, it's less than 14% of the 1,000 people. Right? And of those, it's more like 11%.
Oh. Right. Oh, so it was a very tiny infinitesimal fraction.
Well, it's still statistically true in the population, but it's not an N of 1,000 for black people.
I understand.
And so what I would have said is I would have continued it until I hit the N of 1,000 of black people instead of the N of 1,000 of all people.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I don't doubt the numbers correct, right? What I don't like is that um this wasn't of black people, right?
Hmm.
Specifically, it needed to be for this
That's
question.
right. We agree.
So my view is that the survey opened itself. While it did ask I mean, they're pretty good at this. It asked an honest question as a test of reciprocity, which is usually what conservatives. That's why this particular polling group is favored by conservatives, because they're generally testing for reciprocity. In other words, and the black community and the left doesn't like that that a test would be favoring reciprocity instead of equality.
Hmm.
That makes sense. So, like
Right.
mainstream political polling agencies, the ones that the press likes, they're polling for equality. In other words, they're assuming the level is equality, not reciprocity,
Hmm.
or majority, not equality. So, I'm gonna sneeze maybe. So the poll needed to be needed to continue until n of the black was, because that's what they needed. It was an n of 1,000 to be within 3%. So, when you've got this, you haven't got enough people there to make the definitive argument. And I think that had Scott known that, you know,
Hmm.
it would have changed his opinion. And so I blame the polling agency a little bit for correctly reporting the distribution of whites and blacks, but not getting to the number that mattered, which is
Right.
the 1,000 for black people. I don't doubt that the number would have come out the same distribution.
Similar. Yeah.
Similarly, it's unlikely, because that just it would be consistent with everything else we've seen. But if you poll conservative blacks, it'll come out fine, right? I mean, it won't come out any different from white people. But the minute you get down into the underclass community, you're going to have an issue. Some degree, being conservative basically means being middle class. I mean, we should be clear about that. Is that's what it's a middle class, whether you're carrying a middle class ethic. And it would be nice if you carried the middle class ethic, which is the only ethic of the class ethics, because you have the parasitic at the bottom and the parasitic at the top. So the middle class is the only one that's reciprocal. So what you want, of course, is everybody to investigate the middle class ethic up into the top, and you want to with loyalty to the middle class, and you want the bottom to aspire to have the middle class ethic. And that's how you get cooperation between the classes, by adopting the middle class ethic. Now, I don't know why that's so complicated, but it seems to have taken a lot of thinkers and historians and economists a really long time to figure out what was pretty much obvious. And the reason is they considered class constant over time, instead of class as the means by which you obtain your income.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? In other words, which responsibilities do you have? They considered class a matter of wealth and power, rather than class as a matter of responsibility. In other words, they took a positiva rather than negativa look at history. And when you do that, you'll come up with a lot of stupid answers, which is one of my pretty universal complaints about historians and philosophers and theologians, and pretty much everybody is. If you look at the via pausa ants, you're going to find excuses for anything. But you look at the via negativa, you'll find out, well, the truth is sitting there in the conflict resolution. Sorry, I got that look from.
That was good.
I got that look from you again. So
Subconscious.
So I think that that's part. I would have taken the poll at face value, because it didn't ring false.
No, that's how I interpreted it as well.
And so, but I would blame this a little bit on that, by not making n of at least 1,000 of blacks, then you got into the position of saying, well, now you're making a statement that we can't, that is statistically vulnerable, even though it's most likely. I mean, because it's just how randomness works, right? I mean, it doesn't matter how the number. But for this question, I think they just left themselves open, and then when Scott gets the information, because it's a reciprocity question, he probably doesn't understand that, even though he understands reciprocity. And he just says, okay, he figures out this is, in his mind, this is a good way of explaining what's going on. And so he talks about it. But the benefits of being a nerd, more of a nerd than Scott is.
Right.
Anyway. All right. So did I kill that question?
I think so.
Okay. I can't always judge your little faces, sometimes see, in most shows, you have a guy who talks in your ear, says, it's time to shut up, Doolittle. Now, why don't you move on to this guy?
We don't have that guy.
I don't have that little thing. All right. So let's go. Because you're basically the director here, right? I mean, it's not.
Is that how it is?
You're the producer and director. I'm just the
talent.
I'm just the talking head talent. Anyway, go ahead.
You were going to talk about what is about both sides giving up? What's that about?
I am not a good. I say this all the time. My primary failing is I can't understand the common folk, right? I can empathize. I can't empathize with common folk. But there seems to be something going on in the patterns I'm seeing everywhere. Politics, political discussions, world discussions. And I think the world change is affecting the world change is affecting the national discussion, which is affecting the interpersonal discussion, which is that things are getting out of hand here. General feeling that things are getting out of hand and that people are giving up. I don't know what that means. When I say that, what I mean is that people are losing confidence that their ambitions will produce the predicted ends. So I'm getting the sense that that's happening. And I'm not really sure what occurs, but you certainly do see that we have reached a critical mass of awareness of the severity of the woke problem domestically, right? I mean, there certainly seems to be a shift in awareness of it across. I mean, because it's starting to show up. Everybody's talking about it at every level now. It's like, I can find it everywhere, and they can.
It's like a market failure, I think.
Yeah, and so and that's that's exactly right. A great framing, but to personalize it, they're like, I can't see the future anymore. Like I started. Remember when I started saying I can't see the future anymore? Or I said I can't do it. I can't. No matter what I do, I can't predict the outcome.
It's like we're in the fog of war.
Yeah, I can't see it, and now I think the public is getting to, not the public, but enough of the public is starting to get to where they can't see the future anymore. And so it becomes too difficult to, you get in one position, you hold on to your prior position because you're afraid, right? Of uncertainty. You're more afraid of uncertainty than you are of doubling down. Or you begin to worry about your position because you think, and you begin to look at the condition of the world and say, I don't know what to do. So there's something, it's like, I don't know how to say, I can intuit a gestalt, and despite my ability to generally put things into words, I'm having difficulty putting this into words because it's not my how people feel is my forte. But there's there's a decrease in the level of confidence and certainty, and that people seem to be giving up on the belief that there's that either they can win or that's reconcilable.
Right, like there's it's like
you can't win and there's no solution.
Right, so it's like the common parlance would be all bets are off the table.
Yes.
And I said it like this, it's like there's no investment anymore. There's only speculation.
Right.
And it's like, this is very troubling, because it's like the recognition that your intuition has failed.
Yes.
And so it's like now it's like, okay, everybody's kind of on guard and trying to hedge their bets a little bit if they can figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
It's troubling.
Well, it's understandable why I'd be uncertain, but there's certain benefits that arise out of uncertainty. Is that if the window is actually over us, that's a good thing, in that we are no longer believe in our own nonsense. In other words, not just, I mean, everybody no longer believes in their own ability to succeed. Right? It's just, and that's because there's enough uncertainty in the world.
It loosens the mental springs that are holding everybody in place.
It makes it possible for options to emerge, right? Alternatives to emerge. Mm-hmm. And so that seems to be happening. I mean, I might be just detecting the edge of the wave, right? So it may be a long way off before it gets there.
That's right.
What I suspect is that that uncertainty is going to turn into fear. Yes, does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Right. And then you can see this war thing. I mean, Russia started making really good noises yesterday. We'll see. And the Chinese are making bad noises. And I think I'm more worried about that because I realize the public behavior will be dependent on the worldview. In other words, the direction of public behavior won't be independent of the worldview.
Right.
And so I can't sort of see the collision between these two external and internal, sets of demand for reorganization. And other than us, I don't see anybody who has any solution. But people are slow, but they do get there sometimes. So it's possible something good will come out of this, but it's also possible that it could go the other way. The theory I've been working on, which is the counter to the dysfunction that's caused by socialization by internet instead of socialization in person, is that we have so much information today about the world. In other words, there's almost nothing. It's very hard. We know how many freaking caliber missiles the Russians have left. I mean, it's like, we know so much about each other, and we can see what each other is doing. It has it's having an odd effect on the response time of governments. And that in the past, if you don't know much, you act defensively and more aggressively than if you know much. Does that make sense? Because you have to gauge for uncertainty. So right. There's a behavioral change that's happened in the planet over the past decade. That's been kind of odd to me, and that this is why I'm having a problem with why hasn't Pakistan collapsed yet? Why hasn't Egypt collapsed yet? Why is Turkey still standing? The answer is that we have so much information that there's no need to develop paranoid or fearful or uncertainty momentum, and to escalate in advance of something that causes an escalation in advance of something else. So this appears to be diluting all over the fucking planet. I mean, think of it in this case. Why did Putin make this big mistake? Because he got bad information from Intel, because he's fucking isolated from the internet. I mean, it could be that simple that Putin is afraid of anything that's other than information that's handed to him on paper. So if he's actually, and we know what happened in the South, right? The South is where they spent $1 billion and it succeeded. So it's on Zaporizhia across when the way, in other words, the way they got across the bridge was they succeeded in bribing Ukrainian officials, right, to open the bridge. Right, that's why they made progress down there, nowhere else. And so they thought that inside of intel was a general understanding of how the Ukrainians would act. It wasn't. It's like, it's one of those games of who you talk to determines what you think about the broader group. But this was an asymmetry. It might have been corruption involved too, whatever. But I'm just trying to make the point that if you have bad information, just think about how hard it is to have bad information today. You got to cut yourself off from the internet. You've got to not do what the rest of us do. And so what I see today, hold on, and I'm using that as an example, but that happens in everything. It happens in finance and world economics. It's happening everywhere. And so your ability to build up this paranoid momentum turns out to be, it's always nullified by, oh, I've got information here. So that's happening at the global scale. And I can't quite figure out how, I mean, why things are not blowing up faster. Otherwise, because they should be blowing up faster. And the same thing down here at the social level is we've had the opposite effect, is that everybody's now more aware of how much everybody else hates them, right? And so it's harder to create a narrative, right? It's harder to have a preacher, tell you what Jesus would do, and the Romans and the whatever Corinthians or whatever they would do. They're trying to pull some story out of the Bible, right, and tell you some piece of history in order to make you come together. But there's no means of doing that because there's no priesthood with a constant message. Instead, we've all got our local tribes again. Sometimes all those tribes now are sort of like Europe before nationalism, where there were people from a given culture all spread in little clans all over the Europe, and then the nationalization happened because France invented the modern state, and everybody went home, because that's where you needed to be. So there's a lot of change going on, and I can't predict it, but I can sense at this point that you can see the external world driving the internal world, and the government is in the usual position of being a lagging everything. Right. There's just a lot of confusion going on, but there's not enough choice, not enough disinformation. Excuse me. There's too much information to let it run away with you and develop what would have happened in all of history, which is ramping up, accelerating really quickly. And so I can't predict what's happening right now at any level. I don't know if I tried to answer that question, and I don't know if I did. Did what I say make sense there?
I understand what you said.
Okay.
There you have it. Now you were talking about intergenerational differences earlier as well.
This is not fun. It's a not fun topic, but it's an interesting thing. It's like I'm gonna start out with humor that isn't true, but it's what you would classically say. It's like, now I feel old. Usually I feel like a 19-year-old kid, right? I'm still my 19-year-old self with my 14-year-old sense of humor.
That's what I was going to say. You act like you're 14.
Yeah. So what's the issue? The issue is that the boomer generation, the Jones generation, me and Gates and the technology, Oracle and Apple, right? All of us tech guys. The Y generation after us, which is the people I feel most close to, not the boomers. I feel most close to us. No, excuse me, the X generation, Gen X. Yes. So it's Gen X is next, and then Gen Y, and then Gen Millennials, and then Z, right? Is that how it works? Anyway, I might get there. If I got that wrong, the point will still come across. Is that the is that the post-war folks, the boomers, the Joneses, and the X's, we all have quite a bit of, can we all just get along? We can solve this problem, right? We can get along. As a very tolerant, very Christian, very open-minded position. And
liberal.
Liberal. Well, it's true. It's like, I definitely got raised in the, women are equals kind of crap, it's stuck with me, It did. I mean,
I call that the post-war liberal settlement, that business.
Yeah, and it worked on me. I mean, I gotta say, so, and the same thing in my work is I'm trying to solve for what makes everybody happy. But the generations after us, the millennials and especially the Z's, I'm not sure they're trying to solve for what makes everybody happy. They've gone down to, I want to solve for what makes me happy, my group happy.
Self-absorbed.
Right, they're self-absorbed. And you start seeing that, and I'm having this problem with having confidence. Excuse me, my nose is going crazy again. I'm having this problem of confidence with these next generations, because what I had originally thought was that, well, it's just age, right? I can talk to guys who've had life experience, guys in their 40s and older, or near 40 and older. I can talk to people with life experience, and they can understand, most of what I'm saying. But you talk to people when they're younger and they don't have life experience, then it's like, well, what's wrong? They don't seem to be able to grasp any truth other than, in other words, they can't see something from anyone else's perspective other than intentional evil. So I thought it was just an age thing, right? But what's happened instead is that those of us in Gen X and earlier, we learned to socialize in real life. So we learned to compromise in real life. And what it looks like to me is Millennium and Gen Z learned to socialize online and without compromising. Okay. And so what they do is sort into factions that are like them. And so they develop this, and so they're also trained on continuous conflict, because online creates and sponsors and inspires continuous conflict.
Right, because there's no resolution possible.
Right, there's no punch in the face at the end. Because in reality, that's the whole point, right? Is you don't want to end up with punch in the face, or not wanting to walk through this neighborhood, or not liking your neighbor, right? And you just want to avoid those things because they impose costs on your joy, right? So what's happening is I'm not sure it's just age and life experience. I think it might be metaphysical change in what people think is possible. And the scary question is, who's right? The person who's right is the person in it's appealing to people in the generations classes. So maybe they're right. So this is the problem, is I've been trying to propose a solution that makes everybody happy. But is it possible to make everybody happy anymore?
May not be. It certainly must be entertained that that is a possibility.
So that leads me to the further conclusion that it depends on how the outcome of our changing of the generational guard, so to speak, appears to be dependent upon how stressful the external world creates a metaphysical presumption for us, versus the belief that we have free choices at the domestic level, or the opposite, which is that there are no choices because the external world is so dangerous. This is all we have to do. I mean, there's some spectrum there. It's going to create what seems to be the obvious decision criteria for the population. Because people are going to think they're smart, but what they're really doing is just do the best they can with the feelings they have at the moment. If I do something wrong,
No,
I'm not liking your past two expressions.
my response is poor. I'm sorry. It's rough though, because it's like, okay, what it looks like is everyone must exhaust their opportunities, and then they can learn.
Yes.
So that repatterning won't occur until they have finally exhausted their opportunities. And it's like, so who's right is who ends up with opportunities at the end of the exhaustion period.
Right. Well,
and the other ones will learn from them.
Could you have done that, given that really succinct explanation before I went through the long arc of all the causes and limits?
No, it was necessary for you to swing in the wind for a while.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Let me swing out here on the wind and stumble around. Okay, just teasing. So that seems about right to me. So that's why. So there's too much chaos to be able to determine. This is a little bit of a roll the dice type of thing, is because you don't really know how there's no way to predict what's going to happen here at all, right?
No, and it's just more uncertainty, and then more doubling down to exhaustion.
Right. I just feel like people are starting to get, wow, this is not working, and this is irreconcilable.
But there's more information coming out that's talking about national divorces, and so I see more of that signal popping in, and that certainly is a possibility. And it's like,
well, maybe that's the right discussion to steer, because if you get to the point where national divorce, you start talking about what it really means. The process of understanding that, because people will seek opportunity and defense in it, will cause them to understand our differences, and then we have a broader field of possible choices. I mean, I can't, I can't see liberal cities changing. But maybe that's false. I can't see conservatives would be insane to change. So I can't.
They're not going to change. I can't imagine it.
So
I can't imagine that.
It's not going to happen. So I think once they realize national divorce doesn't require anything other than returning to our Constitution before the Civil Wars centralized it. Once they realize that how easy it is, maybe that's just it. What the basic problem is, you may not have to move to be like people when you're people like me. And they're going to people do that what they're doing now, which is try to resettle people into conservative areas to poison them. But that's not going to happen. Right. So we can self-sort, and conservatives can lay out their goals. And as long as we turn this big immigrant left-wing cities into city-states, then they can't pollute the land around them. And so then people can just sort as they see fit, and we'll see a distribution. Now we'll see Utah's, right? I try to think of a conservative state. I guess Utah.
Greater Idaho, right?
Well, sorry.
Greater Idaho.
Right. I mean,
one of the motions that's interesting is this county. What's the right word? Self governance, like the county choice to pick what state they associate with.
Exactly. Which is what, like, you could take it to this. I said, I don't care whether you take it to the state, the county level, or the district level. I don't fucking care. I mean, nobody cares. We can do this a whole lot of ways. The point is self-determination.
Yeah.
Right. And so that we can contain the the communists to their own little world. And we got to remember that when you create that much density and that much diversity, you generate conflict, and as conflict, the mean for you need for authority. So it's not even that we can have the same governments. Right? We can have the same natural law, the same common law, but you might have different policy within each of those needs, because decision making in your village by democratic vote works pretty goddamn well, right? In your county, it turns out to work pretty well because you have probably pretty common interests. But as soon as you have heterogeneous interests, democracies starts to be a problem. Right now, you got to go for concurrency. Okay, well, concurrency that limits your flexibility, right? So it's one thing. The more diversity you have, the more concurrency you need. The more people you got to convince, right? The slower that you're going to have your legislation. People act. Why is American legislative process so slow? Because we have concurrency, right? Which because we have diversity, because we're a large place. And if you want to maintain sovereignty and democracy, you have to also maintain concurrency. And sorry, once you get concurrency, you get the average of the demands instead of, the average of the demands instead of what each individual group wants. So scale provides some benefits, trade, money supply, borrowing, debt, low transaction costs. You get all those benefits, sure, but you also get all the negatives, which is now I can't customize my town to have policies, rights, duties, and obligations. My nose. You can't do that in a hyper adaptive method because concurrency limits it. Well, if we take this government, throw it back to its original pre-Civil War constraints, then we have more like Europe, which is we'd have somewhere around 60 or 70 states in the United States, just like Europe has 30 something.
I don't know how many are in there.
You would have that sort of thing, right? And over time, some of them would consolidate and whatever, because there's just too much advantage to scale of people. Like, it's just very hard to see a lot of the center of the country not, basically work together. Same as like the fringe left coast and the north. It's just some places are going to want to work together because they're too similar, right? And there's too many benefits of. So if you just have that, you'll have, regional, just like Europe has the Slavic, this Baltic, the Slavic, right, the Germanic, the Italic, right? You're going to have Franco-Italic. You're going to have those distributions in America the same way. Well, that's a good thing, because then people get to have what the fuck they want, and they don't get to hate each other. But you still have the benefit of federalism, which is what the Europeans can't do, because French are trying to make strong federalism like the United States. But strong federalism in the United States is the fucking problem. So we need to devolve the United States back to right, alliance of states and the ability to have self-determination. So while we have all the same fundamental rights, and we're all guaranteed a Republican government, which is what it guarantees us, whatever policies you and I make in our different regions is up to us. And that should be the county, it should be the state, right, reconciles disputes between counties, and let counties make their own fucking decisions. So if I want to have, I'm trying to think of something ridiculous.
I know it's difficult sometimes.
There's the problem is that everything ridiculous is so ridiculous. Like if I want to make Star Wars my what's that Star Wars religion they got? Jediism.
Yeah.
Right, my official religion. Fine. I don't care. It doesn't matter, because natural law is natural law. What it is, your religion is compatible with natural law, and and it's fine, no matter how ridiculous it is. I want a Lord of the Rings version of the Star Wars, religion, right? I mean,
all right,
Anglo-Saxon fantasy. So it doesn't matter. If you want to have abortions, you don't want to have abortions. It doesn't make any difference. Have what you want for the people you want. Satisfy the people you want. But why should you have claim on someone else? There's no reason.
That's right.
The big problem you'll have.
I see this.
Well, go ahead.
I see this as being there's going to be a general devolution of decentralization of authority. It's the only way this works.
Well, that's what empires do. Empires don't civilize, right? Turn into cities. And then once you're at civilized, you're cooperating economically, right? Now you have the problem of, well, now you need federations because people want to specialize. Because you're empowering people to pursue their self-interest groups. And so, you have this natural process of wilding to city-states, to empires. Empires basically create standards, like standards of weights and measures.
Mm-hmm.
And then empires want to grow because by aggression, because the only way to improve your economy is to improve this amount of arable land you have.
Right.
That makes sense, right? Well, those don't apply anymore. All of a sudden, what you want is federalism, right? And so, the natural gravity as progress happens should be to federations, because there is a value in federation, in defense, in trade policy, right? In borrowing capacity. There's these values in federations. There end up being no value in empires. I mean, the only reason to have an empire is the reason Russia has one, is because you've got a whole bunch of very poor groups there, right, that would be prone to warfare if you did get them to the point where they were civilized. To some degree, the empire does the job, sort of like the Romans and the Persians failed to do in the Middle East. Oh, did I say that out loud today?
Oh my!
Did I say that out loud?
I didn't hear it.
So if the purpose of an empire is to create standards of weights and measures which allow cooperation. But after people are cooperating, now they want to fulfill. They want fulfillment. Fulfillment means, I want what we want here over here. My tribe wants to be this way. My tribe wants to be that way. I want to have kulfi and all that fancy Indian food. It's like that stuff is wonderful, right? And it's like being around Georgians, like the southern part of Russia. Georgian cooking is pretty awesome. It's very meat based and whatever. It's very flavorful. Okay, great. There's a whole bunch of stuff like that around the world. So let people be what they want to be so they don't have to fight each other. And the only impediment to fighting each other is the government, which is America's problem. The federal government is an impediment to the pursuit of self-interest in the states.
What's the big interesting rub that is going to come out has got to be that this illegal immigrant problem in the United States is going to be a rub, because they've let so many people into the country in the last 4 years, and it's to resolve that.
We let the Muslims into Spain, we let the Ottomans into the Balkans. It doesn't make any difference, The real answer is that we need to stop the immigration, but the Hispanics appear to integrate fairly well. I mean, I got to make a joke here, but if you can integrate the Irish, you can integrate anybody.
There you go.
I'm sorry, I just had to.
How's that English joke?
That had to be. That's an English joke. Bunch of heathens.
Oh my!
Barbarians. Bunch of drunken, brawling heathens.
Shoot, Curt. So I think that's how it resolves. It's like we're looking for. I think we're exhausting the opportunities of the American empire and centralization, and it will naturally resolve itself in decentralization.
And the only problem is you have to maintain the federal limits, because what you can't allow is hostiles to get access to the geography. It's just Europe's problem, right? It's everybody's problem. Is that you have their natural geographic limits to every civilization, and you can't let opposition into those geographies. It's why we should have taken the Bosphorus, we should have widened the fucking thing and made sure nobody gets across. Nobody can get from Asia to Europe at all. But unfortunately, we let that happen with the Ottomans. All right, so have we answered our questions now? We went through our
Yeah,
list.
we completed the list.
All right, do you have anything else to add today?
I don't.
I don't.
I'm working on my fencing. I have to repair my fencing after the 50-mile-an-hour winds from last week. It got pushed in a little bit, so I've been out there digging around and doing manual labor. I'm gonna buy some cement and put some piers in, and then I put some buttresses on the wooden fence. It's a very exciting day I have planned.
I have built a number of fences in my time. I actually find it very rewarding. I'm not really sure why. You had 50-mile-an-hour winds?
50, yeah, it was rough. It was sounding like freight trains running around the shop while I was trying to do my job, and it's like, okay. And that the ground has been sufficiently wet so that it makes the piers that were holding it together soft, and it's like it just pushed one of them over.
There's something weird about you Arizona people. I'm not sure what it is. Like,
I'm sure you're correct.
It's just like this whole fucking desert thing. I mean, what's the point? I mean,
there's two issues here. You want to keep the wild animals out.
Okay, so
the javelinas have to be kept out. They're like pig-like creatures. You have to keep them out because they tear everything up in your yard, and that's important. So they build walls. You see in Phoenix, they build walls, like concrete walls for your backyard, and it's to keep that because they'll eat your dog. The coyotes will come in and eat your dog.
Yes.
Okay, so it's like, okay, so you need that, and I put my fence up is specifically to keep the prying eyes from looking in my backyard, because I had a patient walk by and he said a comment while I was drinking a beer in my backyard, and I'm like, I'm not having this, and so I built a big wall.
No, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I don't know if I told you my house in Redmond, one of my favorite. It's maintained my favorite house design. It's built in the old style of a courtyard house. So the house is basically an L shaped. The garage forms this bit of this, and then there's the garden shed and stuff make the other wall. And so you have this enormous courtyard where you can be completely impervious to prying eyes. And your wife can go out there and sunbathe in her nothings and not be worried about it, right? And the other reason is you have the entire interior of your house is glass. So when you're a place like the Northwest where the sunlight is a problem, it's there.
That's nice.
So, but yeah, the prying eyes thing.
Yeah, so I have two walls. I have of my courtyard is now there's two wooden walls, and there's my house and my shop. So I make the square like that, and it closes up nicely, and it's as nice as it can be. Isn't that nice? And we mostly keep the pigs out, and that's okay too.
I can't think of anything funny to say here.
No, but I saw some of their little dainty footprints around, and they ate some tulip bulbs because they snuck in when the fence got damaged. I'm like, oh, it's okay.
What are they?
Life is good, Curt.
What are they called?
What's that?
What are they called? What's the name?
Javelinas.
Javelinas.
J.
Are they basically wild boars or?
Yeah, they're they're rodents of some unusual size.
Oh, they're rodents. They're not pigs.
Yeah, there's some kind of rodent. I don't know what.
I gotta figure out what that is.
I will look this up so that we can.
You got scorpions. You got rodents.
The crazy
coyotes.
I mean, coyotes. Yeah, it's just a wild place.
Yeah, you guys are something else. All right. Have a good time working on your fence. Love you, brother. Thank you for today's discussion.
Adios.